Okay, we've decided on a strategy for the night. I'm asking the first question of Brook, then he's asking one of me, and then we invite one from the audience. And we're going to do a round. So every third question is from you guys, hopefully. Hopefully they'll be interesting questions. So. Okay, so my first question to Brook is, for people who are here, who are probably a little less familiar with your work, perhaps you could actually just talk a bit about that first. Just
a small question. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Thank you, Anthony, for that introduction. I'd like to thank the Weavers. Working with the team here, it's just been really great. I love collaboration, and I just think it pushes my own ideas of what creativity is. So thank you all. And so I've been practicing for 20 years nearly, and I'm very interested in the ramifications, I think, of images and histories, and what's revealed and what's hidden, and what's dominant and what's not dominant. So what gets to the A-list in our memory, and in cultures and societies. So that's something that's always driven me, and I say that because my mother's Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal and Scottish, and my dad's Scottish Irish, so I grew up in this kind of mixed family in the western suburbs of Sydney, and the only way I learnt about my mother's side of the family, through education, that is, not through her, was through a science teacher who talked about anthropology. So that was in the 70s and in the 80s, and of course things have changed a lot, but for me that was my kind of clincher. What is it about my family where certain parts of that family is visible and credited and other parts is not, discredited and visible? And so I think many people, especially in Australia, who kind of have mixed ancestry, and that's the beautiful thing about also this society, and we have different stories, and so they're the sort of things that really drive me in my practice. I know it's sort of an anecdote and an answer to my arts practice, but it does drive me to work with historical images like this image, and at the moment I'm working with the Reina Sofia's collection in Madrid and creating an installation kind of looking at Spanish culture and history and Australian culture and history, and looking at ideas of memory and what's been erased, i.e. through the Franco era, and also the regime, and also the kind of colonial histories. So this is, I suppose, a bit about my practice. So we've got, is that okay?
Yeah, you doing that?
No, need one from the audience now.
Can I ask you to talk about how you came across that design?
Is that the first question? Is that biased?
Can I ask you, Brook, please, how you came about that, how you sourced that Kerry photograph, and how you came about that design, which was specifically about identity for the Singapore High Commission?
Okay. I've worked with lots of different photographic collections in libraries and museums, in private and public collections, for a long time. Some of you might know the Sexy and Dangerous work I made in '96. And that was through the Mitchell Library that I discovered that one in Sydney. And this research is actually through IATSIS in Canberra about 3 or 4 years later. And so apart from these images that I've sourced in collections, I've also collected my own photographs and postcards. I have a huge archive of them, which I consequently use in my work. But this image is a Charles Kerry photograph from about 1900. The only information about this is Cunningham from Armidale, so I'm assuming that was maybe the not his name, but the station owner's names possibly. And it's a very striking image. You can't see his face there. But it makes up the work that I did make called Sexy and Dangerous too. And what was that one I working
How the theme of identity can
visibility, I think, is really important. I mean, for me, a lot of the work that I make by reusing historical images, regardless if it is an appropriation or a part of an appropriation or a collage of it, it's inserting back into public memory images I think are not in a dominant space in the psyche of Australians and history. And I've travelled, as I'm sure a lot of you have, to different places of significance around the world. And when I went to Birkenau and Auschwitz, and also to the killing fields in Cambodia, the museums there, there are portraits everywhere. And they're traumatic, but they're important. And the relationship to portraiture and Aboriginal cultures here is complex, and we don't have enough time to talk about it. But I think that if we don't show them, they disappear. And so that's another reason why. And plus we don't have significant monuments here to the history wars, to the frontier wars, to other wars that are very significant like they do overseas. So all of these things kind of feed into why I use these images. And for Singapore, I think it's a complex country historically, just like Australia. I mean, we can't really compare, but I mean, I really started thinking about this work when we were thinking about New Zealand as well. So, there were kind of, different, colonial or post-colonial, or, Singapore having its 50 years of independence. So, I mean, I think it's a reflection really of Australian history. I'm asking a question. Am I asking a question? Oh yes, of course. So I'm glad you've got blame on the ball. I remember being here, and we were talking about different techniques of weaving, and I'm sure we've got some. Everyone who here, I'm going to ask the really, really embarrassing questions now. Who knows? Who understands the different kinds of weavings of tapestry? Is that so? Only about half? Is that right? Yeah, or quarter? A third? Yeah? Is that fair? No? Yes? So when I came here and we started talking about how we translate this into that, I knew it wasn't going to be the same, and that's the thing that's really exciting. And then we decided to have all these discussions about 3 other different what would I call it? Weaving techniques. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk about those different techniques and how we ended up using half pass, which apparently is really difficult.
Okay, in initial discussions, when the book first came in, we looked at what was important to him in terms of his image, and one of those really is the pixelation, the quality that you get by screening a photographic image. And so that was quite important to him, that was also then translated in terms of what we were to do. So we looked at surface and took Brook around the workshop and showed him the piece that was being woven of Sangeeta's work, which had a lot of surface supplementary weft. That's one technique. It's called sumac. And it's a supplementary weft that's woven into the tapestry but basically sits on top. For those of you who've been in here before, you might know it's in Sangeeta, but it's also in the Yvonne Todd, the big portrait with the hair, and some of those bits have sumac. It's a technique we use when appropriate, which is we allow the image to dictate how and what we use, what we do. We also showed you the preliminary samples of the Keith Tyson, which has a lot of supplementary everything. There's a lot of surface work, so there are bits added and wrapped and woven in. So I guess that's another technique of just sort of pretty well doing anything that we like, that really sort of, I guess, really looked at the exuberance of the artwork and tried to interpret that in terms of weaving. And then we come to this, which is half-passing, which is a method of creating a pixel. The main tapestry here is 100% using the technique of half-passing. Half-passing, for those of you who don't weave at all, a pass is taking the weft, which is the wool part, the horizontal part, taking it one direction and back. That's one full pass. So a half pass is taking it only one direction. So in this tapestry we have a full pass going one direction and back, and then we have another half, we have a half passing on top, which is a contrasting colour. So if the full pass is pale, the half pass is dark, and then you get another full pass on top. So the half pass becomes a dot. It becomes a series of dots, which is the pixel, basically. And then the opposite happens in a darker area, where the dark is the full pass and the light is the half pass.
So is it like these little dots?
Yeah, so the little dots that you see are the half pass part of the technique, not the full pass. The full pass creates the colour. And the interesting thing, or the hard thing about doing half passing in this respect, is that the thickness of the weft is not standard. So normally in a tapestry we will use a weft that's standard over the whole tapestry. It might be 10 strands. For every pass that we're putting in, it's 10 strands on the bobbin. In this, it's anything from 2 to 10. So each bobbin is quite different from the next one, and it actually means that the weavers have to be particularly good technically to maintain a surface that's flat, and they have to have an amazing ability to actually, I'm saying this amazing because I didn't actually work very much on the tapestry. I'm not big noting myself. I only did a very little bit. Just realised. They have to have an amazing ability to actually separate tones. So it's not just seeing the tone of the main colour, the full pass, but it's the combination of the full pass and the half pass and how that sits next to the tone next to it. So we started off with about 7 or 8, and we thought, yeah, we can do this with about 7 or 8. We must have ended with about tones. We thought we'd start with very simple and try and manage to do it. I think there must be 20?
No,
16 by the end of it. 16 different tones within the tapestry in order to achieve the effect that we've got. So that's just in terms of the main.
Can you tell everyone what your reaction were when Sue said?
Sue sorry, I'm
that's the example. That's the example. Sue
did the initial sample.
I love this response.
She did the initial sample, and it is fantastic. Everyone realises that that is a wonderful sample, and the half passing works really, really well. But of course, it is very, very difficult. And our response when it was decided that half passing, of course, was the way to go, was this like, oh my God, how are we going to do it? Because it was really something that we've never really done in terms of a whole tapestry, approaching a whole tapestry with half passing. So it is very much to do with having a really keen eye and a really good communication with the people you're sitting with. And in the end, because the tones are so complex and so, I don't know, there's so many of them really, we ended up numbering our bobbins because it's the only way. And it was really to do with how many strands. You didn't want to have to stop and count if the bobbin had 6 or 7 strands on it. You really needed to be able to know straight away. So, is that good?
Well, we're going to throw our questions over to all now because we've got 2 questions.
We could. I don't know. Oh, we could go to the audience. It's going to be quite a lot. I'll just take a minute. Okay. You can speak very loudly, or you can kind of have a stand up. Okay.
I'm wondering about the mask. Did you have a sort of a wider wear, wall than the glass when you've been sewing in the ends, or how did you do that?
Okay, the veil is quite a different story. It's not woven in a tapestry technique at all. It's effectively woven as a textile, a normal textile is in that you're seeing both warp and weft. And the simple answer to your question is yes. The warp was wider than is currently, it's a shaped tapestry, so in fact the warp has been cut and then sewn back through, and that's happened wherever there's a shape. So the warp threads came straight down, and the warp threads went straight up to this width, to that width, and the same on the other side. So everything else has actually been sewn in since it's been finished. So, but this is actually quite different, and when I say that, I mean, we looked at all different ways of doing the veil. We looked at even printing it, and in the end I did some samples. There's 3 sort of samples, different thicknesses, on the edge, using just a white warp, but then we decided if we used a black warp, we could use that as the pixel. Because we wanted to make it a much thinner textile so it would drape, we didn't want to use a weft-faced technique, which is a normal technique. So this allows the warp to show. It was woven upright, so not quite like a textile, but I'm not a normal textile weaver, I'm a tapestry weaver, so I wove it a bit like a tapestry. Has a wool warp, because that helps the weft stay where it is. It doesn't slide down like it would probably on a cotton warp. And we dyed the wool warp black so that would create the pixel. It's a much finer fabric. The weft is only 4 strands ever. There's no variation. The weft is always 4 strands, one of which is silver, either light or dark.
Yes. Well, congratulations, I think. The workshop is very fine. In terms of the piece in front, I'm interested that on the image that you looked at in order to create the piece, there's quite a high concentration of metal in the piece and shine, and yet on the piece that you produced here, interpretation on the piece. I'm just wondering, was that deliberate, or what was the reason?
In fact, it is in fact a quarter silver. So 4 strands, 1 is silver. It's how it shows. If we had an unlimited budget, maybe we could have done a few more strands in there and it would have appeared more silver. But I think ultimately what we were trying to do was create a veil which sat comfortably with its other part. And I think that probably that's what we achieved. In some light, actually, it looks very, very silver. Some lights, it actually looks like it's completely foil. Yeah. So it really is dependent on that, and that happens, I think, a lot with lots of textiles. It depends on the lighting a bit, but yeah, there were decisions that were made which were partly budgetary and partly to do with the overall interpretation of the 2 pieces together.
While we're talking about the veil, have you used veils before on your works, or is this the first?
To be careful what I say here in case I say no, I've never used it before. In a recent film, a 3-channel video work I made called De-Anima, I've been working with textile students at RMIT to create veils, and so when that show opens at RMIT Design Hub in December, depending on how we go, there'll be veils that are incorporated with that. And again, though, it's the similar or the same interest, and that is, what is hidden and what's seen, and it's also about the self. And I suppose this big artwork called The Cell that I made, that looks like a big jumping castle. I mean, there was one called War Memorial Jumping Castle. It looks like a really big kind of inflatable castle, which is my version of a war memorial. And then there's this other one, which is like a long rectangle. It's huge. It's 7 metres by 3 metres by 6 metres or something. But you put a costume on and you get inside. So in some ways it wasn't a veil, but it was about the act of making the body different, and so people could relate to each other differently. But yeah, this is the first time I've used the veil in this context.
Intriguing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I might just say, Milton, on your question about the silver, I mean, I think that in regards to a collaborative project like this, when you're working with different mediums, it's it inevitably becomes something else. And we did talk a lot about, I remember in our first discussion, more silver, but then it wasn't really about that. I suppose it was about how this becomes a textile, or becomes not a textile. It's a tapestry, and we became so obsessed in the veil. So the veil really was the coup, I think, apart from the half pass. It was like, what is this going to be? And we had extended conversations about it had to be lightweight, and how do you get this kind of undulating, almost kind of topographical, weave, and it was. Yeah, but I think it's a really good question. And in light, in natural light, it looks very different.
Being a depiction of a deceased Aboriginal man, has the veil got anything to do with the traditional idea of not looking at the image of a deceased person?
No, not in this context. It hasn't.
We get these warnings on TV that the images of
We're proud of artists like Rachel Whiteread who do the Nameless Library, this incredible sculpture in the middle of Vienna. And coming back to this country and living in this country and still in its denial of those histories, this veil for me speaks 1,000-fold. So I'm really happy that you think about that as well, because I think that's also significant, because you're actually thinking about the portrait, you're thinking about the history, you're thinking about those issues.
I'd just like to make an observation on that poetry. That looking at these as a sequence, when would you
originally this year.
This year. Because to me, it's sort of, creates a sense of gentleness and put together, there's sort of a sense that there's a sensitivity coming into our culture finally about difference and assimilation of all sorts of cultures.
Yeah.
And this sort of is almost like shocking. And this is almost like, well, there's a softness, and if we all get a little softer, maybe we can actually remedy some of the past. That's my observation.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, they're tough issues and tough questions, and I think that's something that even within my own practice, when I collaborate with people, I mean, this is just the gift of tapestry as well, isn't it? I mean, we're using soft materials. I think I was saying to Antonio, to Chris before, I just want to roll all over this like it's a rug, because, the materiality is just so, and it's wool, local wool, organic wool, as per the stories. And I think they're tough questions, but other societies deal with them. But yeah, it's a good observation.
I just wanted to ask you, with the beautiful work that is actually underneath the veil, is that something you're still able to see, or is that something that's always covered, or what is it?
This is good because there's all these. So I'm going to hold it for a second. Because we're laughing here, thinking when it's in the Singapore, like when the ambassador goes home, everyone's going.
I was going to, before you hand it to me, I want you to answer the question.
Yeah, what's your question?
No, the question is, are you going to unveil?
Oh yeah, I suppose I'm not sure.
something, you know, completely different yet so powerful, so palpable. And the fact that you can't penetrate or access the gaze is something that is, you know, profoundly intriguing about what's happened here.
I mean, it's a really good point, because the who has the power here is this subject has the power. We don't have the power, and so it is very much about looking at power relations as well. You know, and dare I say, even the controversy of the Islamic veil as well, that's been raging in the Western world. Where it's going to calm down at the moment, it's going to move to more fundamental issues now. But you know, and I think that also this body, because this body is so healthy, you know, this is 1900. I mean, it's a very positive, very handsome man. You know, there's a positive images of Aboriginal people that we don't normally see in the public, especially in the 80s. You know, of petrol bowsers and all those other terrible things that happen. So I think that under the microscope, you know, I think it shifts. I mean, this is something, I suppose, that's really cutting, really tragic about photographers like Charles Carey's, that they were commissioned by the government to document these people as dying species, as you know, the tragedies of war, victims of war were documented before they were murdered, and yet they can become something quite the opposite. But in regards to seeing the person, yeah, maybe. Oh, because I just want to say some of the weavers are kind of fainting a little bit. How handsome he is. I won't say which one.
He is very handsome. I would actually, at this point, I'd like to make an observation too, that we've spent the last few months looking at these as two separate elements and working on them as two separate elements, the veil and the figure. And I think it's very interesting because we have an absolute knowledge of the figure and the face. In depth, we have a very good knowledge of the face. And it's interesting because most people here will not have seen the face in the flesh. They will only have seen it as it is now, veiled. And I think there's that from my point of view, which I think is actually quite intriguing, is how people see it now as opposed to how we see it, knowing in depth what's underneath and is now concealed. So it's just an observation.
Can I ask you a question? Could you maybe explain your nervousness that you had about cutting the veil off and putting it here? Because you were really nervous that it just wouldn't... This is so sculptural, you know, it's like a 3D sculpture. It's a 3D sculpture, I keep yeah, so I wonder maybe if you could talk about that anxiety.
It's probably just part of me. I think there's something to do with when you finish a piece and you have quite a strong relationship with it. And then it was hanging for a little while, and then we started finishing it off, and that was done a little bit at a time. So we exposed the eyes, the holds, and then put the ends in, and then it's just hanging from the top. And then it's just that next shift of putting a textile which you know should fit with. I mean, we knew it fit because we measured everything. That's not the fit I'm talking about. The fit is more to do with whether we'd made the right decisions in terms of how we'd actually done it, and whether it would then sit comfortably with its other part. And I sort of had hoped that it would be a bit more of a private occasion, and that it would just be you and us as the weavers, but it became a little bit bigger. Not too big, and in the end I was fine with it, but I was very, very nervous to start with. I guess I needed to see it first, and to see it more in a less exposed fashion, I think. So, but that's probably says a lot more about me in a way. I don't know.
Can I just ask a question about that? Were the different weavers making the veil?
I worked on the veil by myself.
So is there a sense? I was thinking there might be a sense that something you've created has suddenly been snatched away. Only worked on that.
Well, I did about a week on the main tapestry, but then it's only really big enough for two people comfortably. And But there was a lot of discussion between the three of us right the way through. The whole time I was working on the veil, we sort of were discussing both. And even when I finished the veil and moved on to something else, we were still discussing what was happening, and I was part of the when they put bobbins up and have a look, and I was part of those discussions. I'm not sure what it is about weaving something. I think probably any time a tapestry is unveiled for the first time in public, or when we first cut it down, then we do the finishing off, and then we hang it for the first time. There's always that sense, you know, everything that you've done, and for your 30 years experience, you know it's going to work, but there's still that little element that makes you sort of, I guess it's what keeps us doing it too. It's exciting.
Grief as well attached to that, because you are emotionally involved in what you create.
I don't ever feel grief at something being cut and finished, actually. It's not neither grief nor relief. It's a sense of achievement, and it's the group that you've worked with, and it's the collaboration that you've had with the artist and the other weavers. It's a complete experience, and not many occupations do you have where you actually work from the very first, and you're doing all the sampling and everything. You're involved in the warping up of the loom, and then you finish right through to the end, and then it's finished off and hemmed and backed and then hung. It's very satisfying to actually do that. I've not yet felt grief or relief at either. Yeah.
I'm just asking Brooke if you think, either for a local or perhaps even an international audience, people might make a metaphoric comparison with the other flankers masks already.
That doesn't look like a tin.
I guess metaphorically in the fact that...
Metaphorically, yeah, absolutely. I don't know. That's a good point. Something to think about. Does anyone think that?
No, hasn't got those haunting Nolan eyes.
While you're contemplating that conundrum, I'm interested in the collaborative process. I mean, we've heard tonight some wonderful comments from you about collaboration and also increase that collaboration. And I know that the deliberations that were going on in the workshop roles were being done.
Tell me about that.
So what I'm interested in, I suppose, is a little bit more of a reflection on you as an artist that often creates these works in your studio, and how much you have to give over of yourself to actually create a work like this in another media, in another scale, and still retain its integrity.
I think I've always worked collaboratively with different artisans. And I was explaining to Troy before, I worked with a master woodblock carver from Kyoto, Kitamura Shoichi, who came to my studio for 3 months, and we kind of lived together and ate together and talked together and bought humidifiers together. I went through the entire process. In fact, I wish I was here a lot more because I went overseas. And so my practice is very much outside of my studio when it comes to making. So I'm very much used to that process. In fact, I think I like it best. I do play with my archives, and I do make some work at home or in the studio. But for me, it was just a natural course of handing over. I mean, as they know, it was just really great to watch them create something. I mean, I really think this is their work. I've said that to them without a doubt. So it's a true collaboration, I think.